Welcome to our third Grow Big Red of the year. And today is on trees to plant and trees to avoid. Our main speaker is going to be Elizabeth Exstrom, and we may have Chrissy Land from the Nebraska Forest Service joining us. And we really appreciate your participating. So, Elizabeth, turn it over to you.
Awesome. So thanks, Kelly. My name is Elizabeth Exstrom. I'm an extension educator out of the Hall County Extension Office in Grand Island. So what we're talking about today is trees to plant and trees to avoid. And I reached out to Chrissy Land, who is the Nebraska Forest Service Western Community Forester, so we could get a Western Nebraska kind of spin on the tree selection, trees that work well out there, things to consider, things to keep in mind, especially when we're doing that. And so I see that Chrissy has joined us. She is on.
Right.
So
It wanted me as a guest and not a panelist.
we will get you as a panelist or as a co-host on there. So Chrissy's going to be providing some of her Western Nebraska slant when it comes to some of this plant material, and then also a little bit of information if I forget something about a particular tree and she happens to remember it, well, then we'll kind of dig into it that way. So like we said, go ahead, put your questions into the Q&A. As we get to a good break, we can get to those questions or we can put them at the end. And so moving on, benefits of trees. There are just so many benefits to trees, and you wouldn't be on here if you didn't love trees. And so the thing to keep in mind is there's many benefits, like cleaning the air. One of the things that we think about is how it cools the streets, and it can actually increase the longevity of our infrastructure because like roads, sidewalks, things like that might be in the shade. And so that's going to increase the lifespan of those. If it's by a house, it can actually help conserve energy if that is shading the house, especially on that south and that west side. They prevent soil erosion. They can be wonderful, wonderful wildlife habitat. And, to be very fair, some of the trees that we plant can be a food source for us as well. I mean, so we can get some of that additional nutrition from some of our plants as well. And then we like the beauty. Who was it that was bragging about the cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C. in the chat? I mean, what a gorgeous sight that Rebecca was talking about with all those cherry blossoms at one point in time. So, I mean, beauty is one of those things that we definitely don't want to overlook. Now, it makes our communities more livable as well. So adding those trees makes people want to get out and about and walk around. They want to be in a downtown area that has trees and provides that shade, makes it a more welcoming environment. We compare that with those storefronts that might not have any shade or might not have any of those trees in that area. What a difference trees will make in that area. So, increase your shopping, make you a little cooler, make it a more enjoyable experience. So all sorts of different benefits when it comes to trees. Now, sadly, we were talking earlier about emerald ash borer and how we were looking for a tree to replace an ash tree. Emerald ash borer is working its way across the state, and unfortunately, there's no immune tree when it comes to ash. So it affects those fraxinus species. So the green ash, the white ash, it attacks trees of any age or condition. So it's not just the super sick trees or the super old trees. And so that's something to keep in mind, that there is hope that we can provide some replacement trees for some of these trees that need to be removed and replaced. And so because we are going to be replacing these trees, one thing that we need to keep in mind is we want to make sure that we avoid certain trees. And so when we're looking at those trees that we want to avoid, first and foremost, it's those trees not suited for the site. Now, you may be shocked I'm not calling out a certain kind of tree right now. But when we're putting a tree in the landscape, we need to make sure that it's suited for the site. So we need to make sure that the site can handle the mostly mature size, height, and spread of that tree. We say like 2/3 mature size. Well, we read the tag says it's going to get 40 foot tall. Does the tree stop at 40 foot tall? Not necessarily. It might get taller than that, but they don't always read the plant label. So that's something to keep in mind. But we need to give that tree room to grow. If we put it in a site that's too small, it's not going to have good longevity. It's going to be stressed. Ideally, if we're going to be digging anything over 6 inches down, we have to call Digger's Hotline, right? We got to call 811 before we dig. And so that's going to tell us by looking down if we have any electrical lines, if we have any buried water lines, or, fiber optic lines, anything along those lines. But we also have to look up to see if we're going to have any competition with those power lines. We want to make sure that that tree is not going to come in contact with those utilities, because what's going to happen if it's an above ground power line, that utility company can and will come through and will prune that tree for line clearance. They are not. Yes.
Can I add something to that also? So
Sure.
if you live in town, one of the things that we always forget to look at is go find your community's ordinances, because somewhere in your city code, it is going to tell you that you can only plant within so many feet of a power line, or a fire hose plug, or any of these different things. I mean, some communities even have clearances or distances from the sidewalk that you can plant. And so make sure that you are checking your ordinances, so that way you don't have to go and take it out later on down the road.
Right. And that's going to be key too, because we have people joining us from all parts of Nebraska, from Iowa, from all over. And so each community is going to be a little different. Some communities are going to have stricter rules in place.
Yes.
And we want to make sure we follow them. So yes, that is so true, Chrissy. We also want to take a look at those sight lines. And those sight lines are, okay, if I'm looking out my front door, if I'm looking out a window, if I pull up to the edge of the curb, can I see around, over, through the tree? In some instances, we might want to block that sight line, but in other instances, we have to maintain that sight line for a corner. So again, it's in those city ordinances, in those city rules, making sure that the plant is X feet back from the corner to make sure that any vehicle that's at the stop sign can see the traffic coming and going. So making sure that we are following those rules, and looking at those sight lines. Also, if I was going to plant a tree, I would put a flag in that area after I've called Digger's Hotline, after I've looked up and looked down and looked for the sight line, and just watch, what are the light conditions on that flag or in that location? What is the drainage like? Different things along those lines. So in my backyard, I had a maple, and I couldn't figure out why that maple was losing or blasting bark on the east side. Like frost crack, things like that should be the south and west side. Why is it happening on the east side of my tree? I couldn't figure it out. I go out in the winter time. What has happened is the degree of the sun hits my window in such a way that the reflective light had a beam of light directly onto the trunk of the tree in that location. And because of that, that created the frost crack on the wrong side. So if we had known, hey, we're going to watch this site for a while and see if there's any issues, that tree could have been moved over a foot and it wouldn't have had that issue. So that also can play a role in that. And then, if you're planning near sidewalks, we need to make sure we have that clearance. So again, those city ordinances are going to say how tall up you have to limb your tree, or, how high you have to be able to prune it, or, if you're mowing underneath it, that's the biggest kicker, is how much clearance are we going to need? So we need to make sure first and foremost, those trees are suited for that site. Blue spruces are cute, right? When we first get them, we don't often consider that that tree is going to get 40 foot tall, 40 foot wide. So the picture on the left, where the blue spruce is immediately close to the house, it's going to eat the house. That tree is going to grow up into the house. It's going to grow up into that power line. It's not going to be a good location for that tree to reach its mature size. If we compare that to the picture on the right, that tree has given enough room, so it's not going to eat the house. Um, it's going to be close to the sidewalk, it's going to be close to the house, but it's not going to grow directly into the house. We talk about, those sight lines and maintaining those sight lines and whether or not we want to see out the window. Is pine the best option right next to the bay window on the left-hand side? It might not be the best option unless it's your bedroom window and you don't want people to look in it. Then you've got year-round screening of that plant material in that location. The one on the right, they inadvertently are screening where the front door is located at. And so that might be an issue, if you're working with your fire department or EMS, if they can't see the address clearly marked on the house, they're not going to know where they need to go. So making sure that we follow those city ordinances, making sure that we're planting that plant so it can reach its mature size, that's all going to be key when we're selecting these plants. So right tree for the right place. I don't know if you can see this or not, and I borrowed this picture from Graham with the Forest Service, but the one on the left is a tree completely surrounded by asphalt and concrete. Do you think that tree is going to have a very long life and is going to be extremely happy in that location? We compare that to the opposite side where we have trees that have the possibility to expand their root zone, to absorb moisture, not covered by concrete, having reflected heat issues. So, we're avoiding those hard places for trees to grow. We're avoiding that direct competition. And we're definitely avoiding putting trees under power lines. Like I said, that utility is going to come through and they're going to do line clearance. And oftentimes they're going to do line clearance for at least 5 years worth of growth because they're not going to come back in for 5 years. So it may look really severe on year 1, but come year 4 or year 5, it's going to look completely different. And so the easiest and the best thing is to avoid planting those trees directly under the power line, or if we are planting trees in those locations where they're not going to be in competition with the power line. So a smaller ornamental tree in that location, as opposed to a tall shade tree, might be something to consider, or like a larger shrub might be something to consider in those locations rather than having direct competition. So, other trees that we want to avoid are going to be that poor quality nursery stock. If the trees that you are purchasing look like either one of these, we're just going to pass. If they are given to you, there are some things that we might be able to do where we square off the pot. So removing 4 sides and turning the ball into a square, we could try that. But if we're buying this nursery stock, we really want to avoid it because that's just a giant mass of roots. And if we happen to miss one of those roots that's crossing over or circling around, these circling roots will turn to or can turn into girdling roots. And girdling roots are where the root crosses over the trunk of the tree. And it's like, I don't know, kinking a hose. Eventually both of these tissues are going to get large enough where it's going to stop or slow the sap flow on that side of the tree. And so, we can have, just a few and it might not be as noticeable. But when we start to get a lot of them, kind of like with the linden in the lower right, that tree's planted too deep, we have circling roots, then we're not going to have the same longevity of that plant and it's not going to live nearly as long and we're not going to get the return on our investment.
And
So,
unfortunately, with girdling roots for the first, 10 to 15, maybe even 30 years of the tree's life, they grow wonderfully. They look fantastic. And then all of a sudden, that trunk finally reaches the diameter of that girdling root, and it just starts to choke it out and reduce the amount of nutrients and moisture that it can translate. And so then all of a sudden your tree starts declining and it's like, what's going on? What happened? And it's like, well, unfortunately, this was a problem that happened 30 years ago and there's not much we can do about it now.
Right. By the time we see the issue, could we have gone in earlier and possibly tried to remove those girdling roots? Hindsight's 2020. If it's one that you can see on the soil surface, the hard part is it's easier said than done to try to cut those roots and not cut into the trunk and not cut too deep into other things. So
And you also are gambling. You don't know how much of the root system you might be cutting off. I mean, that one root could potentially be almost 20% of that root system. And so it's kind of a catch-22. Are you saving the tree from the future, or are you going to so negatively impact it now because you're reducing its ability to actually take up nutrients that it is getting right now?
Yep. And so we're just going to say, if it looks like this, the answer's no. We're just going to save ourselves the headache. We're not going to even try it. We're just going to avoid this nursery stock, even if it's the last one of whatever the nursery has that we really, really want.
It's not worth it.
It's not
You
worth
think
it.
about how much time, okay, yes, it might be a $30 tree today. You go buy it, you put it in the ground, you love it for a few years, you're out that money because then in a few years you have to pull the darn thing out again and then you have to plant a new one. And so then you reset the clock. And so it's just not worth the money. It's not worth the time. Time is money.
Exactly. And especially on some of those larger shade trees like a linden, that's an investment in a long-term tree. I've seen lindens like the mature size, they just twist off like a pencil in the ground because those girdling roots are there. So I mean, just avoid at all costs. I don't know where everybody is at in the state, but those of us in central and western Nebraska, we're going to avoid those plants that are not adapted to our soil. So oftentimes we get iron chlorosis, which is due to the high pHs of our soils. And it's not something that's easily fixed. It's not something that's really, it is kind of preventable because you could plant a tree that's not susceptible to iron chlorosis. But if you were to put in a tree that is susceptible, it might not happen right away, but eventually, if the conditions are right, you're going to see it. So iron chlorosis is where, like in the picture there, limey, yellowy green foliage with a dark green mid vein. It's due to the pH of our soil and making iron unavailable to the. So we're going to try to avoid like those certain kinds of maples. Birch are really common. I've even noticed some crab apples too having issues with iron chlorosis. So I mean, if those are some that you want to plant, do your homework first. I've even seen bald cypress have iron chlorosis issues. So, knowing the location, know where you want to plant, and then doing your research on the species or the genus that you want to put in there to know if you're going to have a problem or not is going to be key. And I know we talked about emerald ash borer earlier, but we want to avoid those trees that are susceptible to certain diseases and insects. So, I mean, we're not recommending putting in ash because emerald ash borer is working its way across the state. We'll talk about a few other ones that we're going to avoid as well. But, those ones that are really susceptible, we're just going to avoid. Or maybe if you can select a resistant cultivar. So like cedar apple rust, what can we do to prevent from having to put down multiple fungicide applications? So those are all things that we need to consider when we're picking those trees and picking the ones that we want to avoid as well. And
Fire
then
blight is another one that is definitely pay attention on whether or not your trees are resistant to fire blight because it can affect more than just apples. And so it's a tough thing once you get it to control it or eradicate it. I mean, it's tough and just, yeah, pay attention to whether or not it's resistant to fire blight. In Western Nebraska, we don't have to worry about so much about like mildew, or it's the white fuzzy. I'm gonna blank on what it is. Powdery mildew. That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah, anyways. It depends. If you're in a microenvironment, you might have to deal with it. but for the most part, we're dry enough. So at least in the panhandle.
Exactly. And that growing environment also can play a role in some of these trees that turn into nuisances. So, if you have a bald cypress, if the soil is kept overly moist, what's going to happen is that bald cypress is going to pop up what they call knees, which are going to be these knobby, woody growths. We actually had a location in Grand Island where the homeowner had a bald cypress and it was gorgeous, but she was in an HOA that controlled the moisture, and the bald cypress was sending up knees all over through the yard. And the lawn mowing guys were complaining because those knees are woody growths that were ruining their lawnmower blades every time they ran over. So she ended up having to remove this gorgeous bald cypress because of the growing environment issue. So we also want to avoid those overplanted species. So, if we look through our neighborhood and everybody has the exact same plant, we want to go with something different. Because if we have those monocultures, that means less diversity. And if we have less diversity, we have higher instances or higher issues with disease and insect pressures. So, pine wilt has worked its way across the state. We've got a monoculture of a windbreak of a specific species. Eventually what's going to happen is if we get pine wilt in that area, it's just going to work through the entire windbreak. So making sure that we have diversity is going to be key. And then we also want to make sure that we are not putting any invasive species in. And speaking of invasive species, the one that is blooming currently in central Nebraska that everybody loves, but I hate. I think it stinks.
In all ways, it stinks in every way. It's just
in every way. The calorie pear, the flowering pear, Bradford pear, whatever you want to call it. This is one that is on a watch list and is no longer being recommended for planting. So, we all like that early spring bloom, but it's going to be one that we're going to avoid just because of the issues. So in our area in Grand Island, we have a grove of flowering pear, and then we have parking lot medians that are soil. And all the way across the parking lot media, on the opposite side of where these flowering pears are located at, are flowering pears that are coming up. And the issue is the birds are eating the fruit and then dropping off their droppings, and then we're getting flowering pear coming up in the parking lot medians. And they are not a good growing environment, and it is not a good tree. So that's why we're really not, recommending planting the calorie pear any longer. The golden rain tree, especially on eastern Nebraska, is on that watch list as well. We want to make sure we really avoid that. We've got some issues with that in eastern Nebraska. Tree of heaven, I feel like is misnamed. Like, I don't know who came up with this common name because it is not heaven. If you've ever had to battle this tree, it puts on a ton of seeds. It spreads from its roots. You try to cut down the mother plant and then 15 babies come up in her place. So this is one of the ones that, we really want to avoid. White mulberry, again, it's another one that we want to avoid. Now, there's a couple of caveats that we put kind of at the end, because it really depends on where you live at in the state, whether or not you should avoid them or you should continue to plant them. And we have this discussion about Russian olive. In certain parts of the state, it's not really recommended species for planting. But for Chrissy out in Western Nebraska, she is pro Russian olive out there.
My honeybees love it. Absolutely love it.
It's a hardy tree. It can handle the conditions. It goes really well out there. But if you're like central and eastern Nebraska, it's one of those where we want to try to avoid. Another one that's kind of on the edge is going to be the cork tree. If we're in eastern Nebraska, yes, we can have some issues with it being aggressive. But out west, you're trying it. It's working. It's not taking over. you know, so I mean, that's one of those again that, you know, depending on where you're at in the state makes a big difference.
Yes, I would put Russian olive in the same boat as Russian sage. It is something that needs to be put in the right place. It's not something to put anywhere, of course, but in the environments where it is so tough to grow literally anything, that's where a Russian olive can be a good tool to still have in your bag. Not something that you're going to go and plant like oak trees or, even an elm or something like that. But we have instances where our microclimates are just so dry and so tough that we have a really limited species list to be able to plant from. And so that's why we kind of keep it on the list. Amber cork tree, on the other hand, we have not seen it move. I would say from like Imperial-ish North Platte West. There's a really neat one at Curtis College. And they have it in an irrigated lawn. Have not experienced it moving much. So that's why, like Elizabeth said, there's a couple of these that we keep them on our list because we got tough soils to work with.
And other ones that are on the list or the chopping block, whatever you want to call it, right? The Freeman maple. So these are a cross between a red maple and a silver maple. Autumn Braze, Autumn Brilliance, Celebration. There's so many out there. So if you look at the tag and it says X Fremontii, this is one that is overly planted. The reason it's getting overplanted is because it is beautiful. Like, I'm not gonna lie, that fall color is amazing. It is beautiful red. It's giving us that quick growth, oftentimes almost too quick for its own good. I saw one that was about, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 inches in diameter that snapped off right at 3 feet because it was growing so fast. So, if you're going to be putting in a tree, these are going to be some that we might want to avoid. Also, black locust. If you've only planted one black locust in your life and you still only have one black locust, consider yourself lucky. Because this kind of thing likes to form a grove. It spreads by seeds, it spreads by roots. It's not one that is really pleasant to keep. Another one that we want to try to avoid is going to be that Scotch pine, and that also includes that hillside creeper, which is a type of Scotch pine. Scotch pine is the most susceptible to pine wilt, and like I said, pine wilt is working its way across the state, so we really want to avoid planting those Scotch pine because we want to try to prevent that pine wilt. And then we talked about ash due to emerald ash borer. Now, we get down to the trees to plant, because I promised you trees to plant and trees to avoid. So here's the trees to plant. First and foremost, it's going to be trees that add diversity. So if you look up and down your neighborhood, we want to make sure that we pick something different. So something to keep in mind is we're looking at species diversity. So no more than 10% of the landscape is made up of any one species. No more than 20% of the landscape be made up of any one genus, and no more than 30% of the landscape be made up of any one family. So if you look down your neighborhood and you're seeing all sorts of maples, maybe you need to think about putting in something other than a maple, to add that species diversity. So I mean, that's going to be key. Now, also, we need to consider age diversity. So we are going to plant a variety of different size trees in different years. And then we're going to make sure that we provide that management for those older trees. So that age diversity is going to be key because we have certain neighborhoods where all the trees are reaching their end of their useful lifespan all at once. And if you remove those trees that are no longer quality or becoming a hazard, those neighborhoods are completely bare right now. And so if we would have had some age diversity and planted at different times, then we wouldn't have this complete blank slate to start from. So adding that age diversity is key. So we're talking about those trees for the growing environment. We talked about looking at the site, making sure that that's right. We want to select that good quality nursery stock. So when we're talking that good quality nursery stock, don't think that you have to get the biggest tree that you possibly can afford. Because they say if you move in a big tree with a tree spade, it sits in the ground and it takes a year for every inch of caliper. So if you move in a 3-inch caliper tree, it's going to sit for 3 years regrowing that root system before it is able to take off again. So, you know, getting those 1-inch to 2-inch caliper trees, they're actually going to rebound much quicker, and they're going to start to grow much faster. But regardless of what tree you plant, it's going to require some water in at least that first year of establishment, and then in those droughty years. So John Ball is a SDSU Extension Forestry Specialist, and he once gave a rule of thumb that he uses on their campus when they do replacement trees. And he said he very rarely will lose a tree due to lack of water. I mean, there's other reasons why, but he says a gallon of water per inch of trunk diameter every day for 2 weeks, and then every other day for 2 weeks. And then we're shooting for about 1 inch of supplemental water per week in the absence of precipitation or irrigation. You know, if your tree is located in a lawn and you're running the sprinklers, well, then it's going to be getting that irrigation and moisture from that irrigation system. So, you know, people say, oh yeah, I watered my tree. Well, how many times did you water your tree? If you watered it once, you know, that's not going to be enough. You know, you need to water it pretty consistently for at least the first month of its life to make sure that it's getting the moisture that it needs. So that's going to be key.
Yeah, and if you're planting trees in the fall, John Ball, that follows all the way through the winter, because this last year we have been so dry. We were watering our trees at Thanksgiving, we were watering them at Christmas, we were watering them again at New Year's because it was still dry, and then just making sure that at least throughout the winter months, that once a month you're getting, I would say, roughly about a 5-gallon bucket worth of water on your tree. But pay attention, because otherwise you're essentially bottle feeding all the way through the growing months with your irrigation system, and then you shut it off, and then there's no water. And that applies to your evergreens, your newly planted trees, your established trees. Just get them some water. They will thank you.
And one other benefit to planting in the fall is we only need to provide that water up until when the ground freezes. So if the ground was to officially freeze and we've had enough moisture, we wouldn't have to water, but we take that into consideration when we plant in April and we're watering it for the first month of its life, and then we're making sure that it gets 1 inch of supplemental water a week. We're babying that throughout, you know, May, June, July, August, September, and October. If we were just planting it in the fall, we could baby it September and October. So it all depends on how much water you want to haul to keep it well moist, you know, well watered throughout the growing season. So now we come down to the trees to consider. So everybody always wants a list of trees that they can try. We have several different lists depending on if you're in the eastern part of the state or in the central or western part of the state. The Nebraska Statewide Arboretum and the Forest Service have some really great resources on trees to consider. So some of the trees on their lists are going to be the common hackberry. Yes, I started with the common hackberry. The reason for that, I think it's a good tree. Yes, it's quick growing. It may not be the longest lived, but in my mind, it's a substitute for like the Fremontii maples. You know, in the right conditions, it's a tough plant. It can handle a lot. There's different cultivars, whether it's Chicagoland, Prairie Pride, Magnifica, I can't say that word, Chrissy. That one that's last there on there, you know, that's another one to consider when it comes to some of these hackberries. But I mean, a really nice overstory tree, you know, it can handle temperatures to 40 below.
I've come to the conclusion that people dislike hackberry so much because they were not properly pruned when they were young. And that's their frustration with them. And so if you plant a hackberry and you are in it to set that tree up for success, these are such tough, beautiful big shade trees. They have so much value, and they should absolutely be planted just as often as all the other species that we're planting. That's my plug.
And another one that might get a little question marks is going to be the honey locust. I know we had somebody in the chat earlier that said they love their honey locust, and I was like, yes, good. Now, the thing to keep in mind, all honey locusts are not created equal.
No.
You need to make sure that you get the thornless and preferably podless. That's
Right.
just my preference, but I mean, to each their own. So for sure, thornless, because those thorns are huge, they are nasty. If you don't want to be picking up those long strap-like pods, you want to get the podless one. Lots of different ones. I mean, Skyline has been on the market for a long time. Sunburst has been on the market for a long time. Honey locusts are a tough as nail tree. They survive in the tree wells in downtown Grand Island. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind. They are really tough. They're a great street tree, something that you need to consider. But yes, we have a fan of honey locust in the crowd. So good.
And make sure you pay attention to the mature sizes of these different, because with these newer cultivars, I mean, they actually have some that are smaller honey locusts rather than our typical, 60-foot tall, 60-foot wide honey locust. So, like she said earlier, don't plant the wrong tree in the wrong place. If you've got clearance, things, consider looking at. There's so many options these days, but.
And these are just a few examples of cultivars.
Right.
There are so many cultivars out there that I know I can't keep track. I know Chrissy can't keep track of. So the main thing is when we're looking at these cultivars, figure out where they originate from or what the seed source is.
Yes.
You know, if it's a northern seed source, Nebraska North, maybe
Right.
you could go down to Missouri. I don't know. But if we are picking seed sources from the northern states, that's going to be able to handle our super cold temperatures. If our seed source is from down south, that's where we have issues with our hardiness. So, do your research when it comes to these
Right.
cultivars. Figure out where they're coming from. Sometimes they give you a hint in the name, like Street
Right.
Keeper. It's probably going to be narrow. It's going to be good by a street. But that's something to keep in mind.
We're always watching North Dakota State University for the different types of cultivars that they're coming out with their research, and we know that if it's gonna grow in North Dakota, it's got a pretty good chance of surviving in Nebraska.
Exactly. Another tree that's kind of making its comeback is going to be these hybrid elms. So we all know Dutch elm disease came through. It decimated our American elm populations. And so what has happened over the years is they have done some crossbreeding between different elm species and crossbred them back with the American elm and other elm species. And so I know sometimes elms get a bad rap because everybody thinks of the elms in the pasture, not the street tree elms. But these elms are awesome. There's so many different cultivars out there. The thing to keep in mind, these things grow like crazy. And so if you're going to be doing any pruning on them, like
There's no if. You must do pruning.
And you prune early and you prune
Yes.
often. It
Absolutely.
is not, I'm going to wait for 5 years before I start to prune it. Because if you wait for 5 years, it's 5 years too late.
Right.
These things grow very rapidly. And each one of these kind of has a little bit different parentage, genetic makeup. So I mean, read the descriptions, do your research, figure out which one's going to work best in your zone and what the pros and cons are of each one of these. But these hybrid elms are going to be one to be on the lookout for if you have that spot for a large tree. One that I don't think gets talked about enough is that Turkish filbert.
Yes.
It's cool. It's got a really rough leaf to it. It's got a nice shape, a nice form. We need to make sure that we pick a northern seed source, but I mean, it's one that we don't have a lot of, so
There's
why
one in
not?
Gearing. So if you're ever in the Panhandle, it's at the junior high.
So, I mean, if it can live in Gearing,
Right.
give it a shot. Another one, now this one might kind of get me some guff, and that's fine. If you have the location for a pecan, because we're from Nebraska, we say pecan, not pecan. But this is one that it takes a while to get to maturity before it starts producing nuts. But I mean, you won't find very many because the
Right.
squirrels are going to pick them all for you.
We
So I
also
mean,
have 2 of them in Gearing, and we have tried collecting off of them every year, and they are in a neighborhood with a bunch of bur oaks. And let me tell you, those squirrels will pick this buddy out faster than anything, and we can never beat the darn squirrels to the pecans.
so I mean, just keep that in mind. You might not have to do as much cleaning up as what you think.
No.
Ginkgo. So this is one that I will tell you to keep in mind. We want to make sure that ginkgos are not stressed. Okay. So ginkgos have male trees and they have female trees. And what can happen is if the male tree gets stressed, it can switch to be a female tree because then what it wants to do is it wants to drop its fleshy seeds. It doesn't have a fruit technically, it has a fleshy seed that is surrounded by dog poop smelling flesh. So
It's
I mean,
gross.
it's not pleasant. So this is one of those where, you know, parking lot island, living in a tree well might not be the best location for it because of the reflected heat, restricted root zone. To each their own though. But this is one, you know, there's several out there. Autumn Gold is one that, you know, is pretty on the market. Another cool part about ginkgos, so we get a super hard freeze and then like it drops its leaves all in one day. So I mean, none of this extended leaf raking kind of stuff with the ginkgo. It is like I'm gonna rake my leaves all in one. Kentucky coffee tree. So this is one that Chrissy told me a lot of different cultivars out there. You know, Kentucky coffee tree, the straight species does produce these large pods with marble-sized beans inside. You know, so if you're looking for one that doesn't have the pods on it, there are several different cultivars on the market. You know, again, making sure you have those northern source like True North, the name kind of gives it away. And the reason we're wary of espresso, Chrissy, why do we not like espresso?
I was notified that the scion wood, so any of these seedless, they're grafted. So that way they can guarantee that you're not going to end up with seeds. And the scion wood is the top part where they've taken a cutting off of a mother tree, given it its own root system. And I was told that the scion wood actually comes from Northern California. And so we have serious problems with the top dying back in our freezes in Western Nebraska. And so espresso just doesn't, it's odd. We could plant 10 of them and 2 will grow and they're beautiful. They do wonderfully and the other 8 will freeze. And then we end up with sprouts coming up from the base of the roots. And at that point, you just know you're getting a straight species Kentucky coffee tree. So True North is one that's coming out of North Dakota State University, I believe. And I cannot remember who brought out decaf, but decaf is one it's harder to get a hold of, but one that we are trying to test a little bit more to see if we have the same issues with espresso. I doubt it because it's probably not the same source.
So be wary. It can out west be one of those issues.
It's our snap freezes that really seem to get them.
Other trees to be aware of, the sycamore. I mean, if you have the location for a huge shade tree with giant leaves, the size of your face, you know, this is one, it's got really fun bark on it. You know, the tree is just really huge. It's just a really fun tree, produces quite a bit of shade. So, I mean, this is one to be on the lookout for. There are some hybrid London plane trees that are also very similar to the sycamore. So those are some other ones to consider as well. But Northern Advance is that northern seed source. So be on the lookout for that. You know, the heritage oak. We have lots of oaks, and I know Ian wanted us to all plant oaks in the chat. So we're getting to them, Ian, okay? But this is one to be on the lookout for the heritage oak. This is a really good one. It's a cross between a burr and an English. So it says it has better cold tolerance than the English oak. So this is one that, you know, if you can find, go ahead and try. Chinkapin oak, talking with Heather Byers at Great Plains Nursery. This is one that she just really recommends because the blue jays eat the acorns. So you don't have to pick up the acorns.
This is an amazing performer all the way across the state. I will say, go shop for your chinkapin oak late in the fall and find the one that has the natural genetics that gives you that Husker red fall color. They have a variation of their fall color from kind of a burnt-ish red orange to some of them, depending on the temperatures, of course, and how the pattern lays out. I have seen some chinkapin oaks literally turn Husker red, and it is the coolest thing. So, either way, they're definitely a tree to plant all the way across the state. Underutilized for sure. If you've got a few too many bur oaks planted in your community or on your street, consider a chinkapin oak.
Now, this tree is susceptible and a favorite of the Japanese beetle. So I'm just going to put that out there. If you don't know what Japanese beetles are yet, you will. But those of us in central and eastern Nebraska, you know, this is one where if it's a mature tree, we really don't consider doing any applications. But it is one, especially the little leaf linden, is a favorite of the Japanese beetle. So, but it does so much. I mean, if you're talking about a pollinator plant, those flowers in the spring, you know, they are a great nectar source for bees. So, I mean, it is one that will attract all sorts of insect, a great pollinator. We just have to be sure that we are not planting them too deep. And that we are making sure we don't have any girdling roots, because those are two things that we commonly see with the linden. Now I had to throw some evergreens in because why not? So ponderosa pine, again, this is a really great pine. It's a native pine, grows well across the state. It can handle heavier infestation loads of pine wilt and not be affected. So that's where we're not recommending the Scotch pine. We're doing the ponderosa pine kind of in its place, produces large pine cones that you can have an awesome pine cone fight with. Another pine to be on the lookout for is going to be this limber pine. So it's got 5 flexible needles. This is one, it is drought tolerant. Now, there is one called like Vanderwolf's Pyramid. That's more of like an upright one. You know, in certain parts of the state, that's great. Other parts of the state, not so much. And then out in western Nebraska, Chrissy, you have something else to be aware of.
Yeah, we have to watch our Vanderwolf pine a little bit for white pine blister. There's been just a handful of cases that have been mentioned on it, but also porcupines. For whatever reason, they really like this limber pine. But we do have a native stand of limber pine in the southwest corner of the Panhandle of Nebraska. And you can work through Bessie Nursery. I'm trying to remember if Heather might be carrying some that come out of that Kimball seed source. But definitely, or you could reach out to the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. One of us could get you hooked up with that native seed source out of Nebraska.
There we go. So we've got some options. There's lots of great lots of great informational sources on plant selection. I mean, experience, talking to people who know, like Chrissy. There's the Great Plants for the Great Plains program, the Nebraska Forest Service and Statewide Arboretum. We have different plant trials that are located, you know, whether it's Missouri Botanical Garden, whether it's Plant Select. You know, we can find information in a lot of different places. So we also have some additional resources. So I talked about how some of the tree lists, you know, I tell people to look at the site first and then look at the tree list and double check with their nursery to see what they carry. I mean, because you could walk around the nursery and pick everything out, but then if it doesn't fit in the site, that's not a good choice. And then if it's not hardy for your area, again, it's not a good choice. So I'm just going to say those of us that are impulse shoppers, we need to do our homework first, and then we need to go shopping. Also, you know, regardless of what tree we plant, we need to make sure that we are taking care of that tree and managing it well. And so making sure that we have that water, there's that water requirement again that John Ball kind of gave. We want to mulch around the trunk of the tree and protect it from wildlife. Now, I lost a shoe-marked oak to a rabbit. I was not going to lose my tulip poplar to the same rabbit. So I learned my lesson and I put hardware cloth in a tomato cage and surrounded it. Those of you with deer, we're going to have to do a little bit something more substantial, and we have to do it for longer because it's not just the deer nibbling on the branches, but it's also the buck rub of the bucks trying to get the velvet off. So, I mean, we have to make sure that we are taking all those precautions. So if you want to learn more, actually, the Forest Service is doing an educational workshop on Friday. That is this Friday on April 11th. It is right tree, right plants, right place, and properly planted. So in that, you can find the link. It's over the noon hour. So that's another location. They are doing webinars throughout the summer months this year on Fridays. And so look up some of these opportunities with the Nebraska Forest Service. And speaking about other educational opportunities, be sure to join us next month when Scott will be talking about consider these natives. So talking about native plants. This one is going to be on Wednesday, May 14th, same time over the noon hour. And if you have any questions, here is both of our contact information. And two, if you go to that little QR code thing there, it will take you to the evaluation about the program today. I know we left about 8 minutes for questions, and I saw everybody madly typing into the chat pod about these questions. But, you know, reach out, let us know. Like I said, I invited Chrissy to give us that Western Nebraska slant. So that's going to be the key, but please fill out this evaluation and be sure to join us next month when we talk about native plant material.
Okay, well, since we are at a little bit over time, I'm going to give a huge thank you to both Elizabeth and Chrissy for such great information on trees. We need to plant those trees. They are so important to our communities. So thank you. And just a reminder, our next GroBigRed is on May 14th, and it's Consider These Natives with Scott Evans. So we hope you can join us then as well. Thank you.